I think people often feel like, oh, I would feel more in control of
Yeah.
my busy schedule, my busy life, and I would be able to cope in a world that feels extremely overwhelming if I got organized and made a plan and it's 5 days. And the truth is that that works for some people. But for a lot of people, that's just going to get you further
Yeah.
from connecting the dot between what you are needing and what
Yes.
you're making for dinner.
Welcome to Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. I'm Nikki Sizemore, and in this podcast, we explore how food connects us and sometimes disconnects us to our minds, bodies, spirits, the earth, and our communities. This is a space dedicated to bringing more presence, intention, ease, and joy into the process of feeding ourselves. Let's dive in. Hello, my dears, and welcome back to the show. Today's episode is all about cooking burnout and how to find or reignite your creative spark in the kitchen. I speak with Maggie Hoffman, the executive producer and host of the Dinner Plan podcast. She also writes the Dinner Plan newsletter on Substack. This episode is going to be so helpful for anybody who's experienced overwhelm, stress, or lack of inspiration in the kitchen, which I think is literally all of us. Maggie shares her experience of cooking burnout during the pandemic and shares the tools, tactics, routines, and rituals that helped her through that. We explore how a bit of structure can actually help us find more freedom as cooks, and how we can better tune into our own individual wants and needs in order to nurture ourselves in the kitchen. Maggie also shares tactics for meal planning in a way that provides joy instead of added stress. And we talk about how we can let go of perfectionism in order to create meals that are more relaxed and enjoyable. I loved this conversation so much. You're going to walk away with real tips and strategies for finding more inspiration in the kitchen, but you're also going to, I think, feel a bit more grace. You know, this thing that we do of feeding ourselves is not always easy, and that's okay. The kitchen can hold it all. It's more about tuning into what we authentically need and honoring that. If you enjoyed the episode today, please support it by sharing the episode with your people. You can comment over on Substack. Speaking of Substack, subscribe to the Mind, Body, Spirit, Food newsletter. In the newsletter, I go deeper into these topics. I also share weekly recipes and more. If you become a paid subscriber for just a few bucks a month, you make all of this ad-free work happen. This is a community-supported space. It couldn't happen without you. As a paid subscriber, you get access to the full recipe archive, well over 120 recipes, all of which are naturally gluten-free. You also get bonus content, discounts on my one-on-one sessions, and more fun perks. And last but not least, my new cookbook, Mind, Body, Spirit, Food, is now officially available for pre-order. Pre-orders are a really easy way you can support writers. They're massively important. All right, my friends, without further ado, let's get into the show. Hi, Maggie. It's such a pleasure to meet you and to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for doing this.
I'm so excited to chat with you. I feel like our worlds, we're 1 degree separation. We've orbited each other. And so I feel like I know you. I mean, apart from just hearing you on your podcast, which is amazing. But I'm going to start by asking you the first question I ask all my guests. And that is, what's your cultural upbringing and how has that influenced your relationship to food?
I grew up in Oregon. My mother was an amazing cook, and the local produce and seafood and everything there is just so awesome and full of flavor. So I think that's really the primary thing that sort of shaped what I want food to be. And it's a place where people have secret spots for foraging mushrooms, and you go hiking and pick salmon berries. And there was this big lot of blackberries in our neighborhood, and we would just go and fill old yogurt containers and stuff. So I think all of that shaped my relationship to food a lot.
Mm. Did you always know that you wanted to build a career in food?
No, I always watched my mom cook. We would always spend time on the weekends, like cutting up magazines, cutting out recipes
Mm.
from the Oregonian and recipes from Gourmet. And she had these big binders of things that, like, did they ever get cooked? I don't know. So it was always a part of something I was interested in. And I would sit at the counter and watch her cook. But then, I graduated from college and moved to New York and felt really homesick and far
Mm.
away. And would cook and like call my mom and we would talk about what each of us was cooking. So I think since I've really been cooking for myself, it's also all been about that conversation.
Mm.
And I started out after college working in publishing. And I had a few sort of desk jobs in publishing that were pretty uninteresting. And I was also not particularly good at them. And so I spent a lot of time reading food blogs in those years in my tiny little cubicle. And those were the days. I mean, this is dating me, but those were the days where like food bloggers really, it was just like a small circle. And I started a food blog with a friend while I was still at that job, and really realized that I wanted to write and I wanted to do things that were creative. And the food was sort of the space for that. And that's when I started writing for Serious Eats. I sort of pitched myself despite really not having much qualification. But I could see that they didn't have anyone writing about beer. And I was like, I'm from Oregon, so that should do it, right? That should do it. And I convinced them to hire me full-time in 2010. And we launched a sort of drink section of Serious Eats. And then I was the managing editor at Serious Eats until 2016. And so that was really an exciting time in food and media and the internet. And we were just experimenting. And I got to meet so many amazing people and taste so much amazing food. And I went freelance after I left Serious Eats. I was writing for a lot of magazines and the San Francisco Chronicle. And I wrote 2 cocktail books for 10 Speed Press. And the first one was called The One Bottle Cocktail. And it was really for cooks to sort of make cocktails the way you cook. So you have one bottle, you have gin, you have vodka, whatever it is. You have one bottle and everything else is something from the grocery store, something that you're cooking. And then the second book was called Batch Cocktails. And it's all about drinks to make ahead for guests. And I think I was really starting to realize that entertaining was so important to me, and really that the time together was so important. And the whole point of this book is that when someone comes over and you're spending time together, you don't want to be rattling a thing and straining a thing and spilling stuff. It was like you should be with the people that you've invited into your home. And this was a tool for that. Hand them a drink. It's already been made. You get to sit down together. You get to connect. And that was sort of where my head was at the moment. But I really missed writing about food. I really missed editing. I didn't want to be pigeonholed in the drinks world. It became like, okay, I'm only going to write about cocktails for the rest of my life. That's not me. And it's so wonderful to get to work with different writers and edit. So when we decided to move back to New York, I joined the group at Epicurious. And I was there as a senior editor and then digital director, so 2019 to 2023. And got to be back in food again and got to have a pile of cookbooks on my desk. And I wrote a story when I was at Epicurious about cooking burnout.
Yeah.
And, really, I think many of the experiences, it was a group of people working together, but it was a lot of young people who didn't have families. And my experience of the early months of the pandemic was so different from theirs. And I really entered a period of real burnout. And all these people were sort of like, oh, I'm so bored, I'm going to make sourdough. And I was sort of like, I'm in disaster mode with a young child at home and 2 full-time jobs. It just was this really rough moment for, I think, anyone with either young children or elders to take care of.
Yeah.
And I wrote this story about burnout and it really resonated.
Yeah.
And I wanted to dig deeper into that idea and talk to cooks about where they find inspiration and how they nurture their relationship with cooking and feeling good in the kitchen. And, I've always loved the finding a cool part of a recipe or all these different things. But fundamentally, I sort of lost the love of it when I was faced with this really challenging time, and all of us were. So when I left Condé Nast, I decided to make a show of it.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we talk about. I think so many people are living so stressed.
Yeah.
And you still have to make dinner. And even if you love cooking, that can be really hard.
Yeah. I want to get in. There's so much that I want to get into. First of all, like the thread of food for you was your connection back home. So this idea of food being this vehicle for you, I think what I'm trying to say is that the kitchen holds so much. And it can be this beautiful place of connection, whether that's connection to ourselves, which is kind of my focus, or connection to other people when you're entertaining. And capital A-N-D, it can be a massive place of stress because, as you said, we all have to eat. That part is not negotiable.
Yeah.
And for many of us, whether it's due to budgetary restrictions or food restrictions or a host of different ideas, we need to cook for ourselves. We need to prepare our own food. So I kind of want to go into that moment a little bit during the pandemic, and you faced this serious burnout in the kitchen. What did that look like for you personally? Because I think that might look different for everybody.
Absolutely. I think it ebbs and flows all the time. And that was really a moment of crisis where every hour in my body, it felt like my heart was always pounding, the adrenaline of everything. And that is, stress and overwhelm. Stress and overwhelm is different from burnout. Burnout is when you go all the way over that hill and you stop. You stop loving the things you used to love. You struggle to connect with the things that sort of normally would keep you going. So, I think for me, that was one moment where things felt out of control. I couldn't do the whack-a-mole. I was, taking care of a young child and like trying to do Slack on my cell phone in the bathroom with one hand while taking care, just like the chaos of all of that. And there were moments in that where the cooking was sustaining, where she was so little then, she got into mixing brownies. And it was like, okay, this is an activity. You're just trying to fill the day, right?
Yeah.
And this is an activity we could just like really focus. We were making a lot of oobleck, that like weird, what is it, cornstarch and whatever else, like something tactile. It's not that different. The stirring of the brownies or the touching of the oobleck with a small child was like, okay, like we are going to focus on this one thing and sort of like let everything else fall away. And that can be a tool against the pounding adrenaline, and I think there have been times in my career where, everyone's asking so much, there's so much pressure, there's a smaller and smaller team, and you're expected to absorb other people's work until there's just literally not enough hours in the day, that stress building and that overwhelm. And then if you enter the kitchen in that state, I would like blast the Indigo Girls and like try to like get my body to get out some of that adrenaline and feel so overwhelmed that I couldn't focus in the kitchen. I've interviewed a lot of different people about sort of like the spectrum of experiences. And I don't know if you know, Mira Soda is this wonderful cookbook author, and she's written a bunch of books and she writes for The Guardian. And she wrote her recent book, Dinner, is really about an experience of burnout in which she truly couldn't get out of bed and couldn't cook. And she said to me, the way to come back from a place of truly not being able to work, a true shutdown, was to try to listen to herself and recognize, oh, maybe that sounds good. Maybe I could eat that. Maybe I have a craving for this one dish. Maybe I could. And then sort of just like, okay, following that sort of human craving as a
Mm-hmm.
way to sort of like reconnect the things that have kind of all, burn out. The synapses aren't connecting or whatever
Yeah.
anymore. What sounds good to me now? What could I eat now? And then, one step at a time.
I have a book coming out in January called Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. And it's really, this is like the topic of that book, but how that manifests for each of us differently. But one thing that I have written about and that I talk about in that book is this idea of knowing what we want. And when we are in these situations where life gets big and life gets crazy, and this can mean that, like during the pandemic, I had 2 little kids at home, same story. Although this can also just mean having a crazy work schedule or having a family crisis, or there's a million ways that our lives can start to feel so big. And within that, it's so easy to lose track of what we need and what our actual likes and dislikes are. Like, I got to a point where I think I described this in the book, where it felt like my tastes were swirled up like butter and mashed potatoes with those of the people I fed. I couldn't even distinguish anymore between what was mine and what was theirs. And it did take a level of burnout for me too, physically, which is interesting that I think manifests for some of us. It's like our bodies are like, okay, no, now we have to get quiet. And this might be the only way that you're going to get quiet enough to start to hear what that voice is again. And just that simple question of like, what do I want right now? We don't often get quiet enough or still enough to even ask that question of ourselves. And I think that's so powerful.
And I think people often feel like, oh, I would feel more in control of my busy schedule, my busy life, and I would be able to cope in a world that feels extremely overwhelming if I got organized and made a plan and it's 5 days. And the truth is that that works for some people. But for a lot of people, that's just going to get you further from connecting the dot between what you are needing and what you're making for dinner, right?
Yeah, exactly. What do you need? And sometimes what you need is just the simplest. Sometimes what I need, at least, is to ditch the plan altogether. And I think that I kind of want to actually get into that a little bit. When you were in the pandemic and you were feeling this sense of overwhelm and stress, and you found simple things that could help still you enough to kind of take you out of it, like stirring the brownies. You just had to be there with your daughter stirring the brownies. And there's
so many brownies.
There's some magic in that. But when it came to crawling out of that sense of stress and overwhelm in your body, was there a situation, a realization, something that happened in the kitchen that you were like, oh, wait, this is going to help get me out of here? Or was it just a gradual step by step?
Honestly, I'm trying to remember, and it feels like that was just such a rough time that, it's like childbirth. It goes away from your memory, right? Eventually, I think in that time, it was figuring out how to ask for help, figuring out how to bring in, family and other people to share it all, because there just weren't enough hours in the day. In a more recent time, when it's been more about work pressure and all the worries of the world, it really did take like a drastic change in the schedule, in saying like, oh, like this situation is untenable. This situation is unhealthy. This level of adrenaline is going to kill me. And really, in fact, a clean break. And I think now when I recognize those patterns of the building up of overwhelm, I try to remember like, okay, what are some routines that feel good in the kitchen? when do I feel good in the kitchen? It's this thing of like, when you're on an airplane and they say like, you got to put on your own oxygen mask before helping someone else. If my husband travels a lot for work. So I have these like weeks where it's all on me. I need to be the emergency contact. If somebody gets sick, I need to, all the things.
Yeah.
And plenty of people do this full time. And that just seems so impressive and challenging to me. But when it's this thing where it's once a month or once every 6 weeks, I try to build in routines that give me a little more space. So it might be that even though, okay, so you have an hour, let's say, between like the morning and the evening to feed people. I mean, first there is this like, really, what would happen? What would happen if dinner was late?
Right.
It might be fine.
Yeah.
But if in that time, it might be that the best use of that time is a 15-minute walk, 15 minutes of cleaning up so that you're not struggling to cook in a space that's stressing you out. Like I'm a person who like has everything on the counter because I'm like, oh, I need to grab it. And it's like, no, like you're using up half of your counter with all these things. If you can just figure out another place to put them, that maybe those 30 minutes are better spent not cooking. And then the meal itself, really, I have to think in sort of cycles. Like I have to think like, okay, what do I need to eat to feel on top of this, to have the energy to do both what I usually do and what my partner usually does in the parenting routine, right? Like I need to really eat for sure. And sometimes it's like, well, I'm going to eat this thing from the freezer for 2 days. And then I'm going to eat kimchi quesadillas and the really feeding myself, having a plan, and sometimes stealing that time. Like, maybe it's during lunchtime. I'm going to do something so that when we arrive at that moment where kids home and everything's urgent, some things are already done.
Yeah. It's so interesting because in the past probably couple of years, I've been paying a lot of attention to my energy. And I've gotten to the point where I can really feel when it's starting to spin. And I found if I allow myself, like I'm talking, it doesn't have to be more than 10 minutes of laying down. I'm going to go lay down. I'm going to collect all of this energy that is fizzing out of me and bring it back into my body. Whatever I end up doing after then, I talk a lot about intention. It's if I bring that intention, an intentional reset, it's amazing of what I can get done afterwards. And I don't want to frame this in the sense that I do this to be more productive. It's actually not that, but I do this to bring myself home to me so that whatever I walk into, whether that's in the kitchen and cooking dinner or, doing some sort of work stuff, I come into it as my whole self. I'm not a scattered, stressed, depleted thing, which then I find I will spin out. And that's when I really get like so tired, so exhausted, so like head on the counter, like, oh.
Yeah.
But sometimes it takes 5 minutes.
It's been really interesting to talk to all these different people. I talk to a different cookbook author every week, and we always talk about like, how do you get through the week? How do you think about cooking both as like a sustaining thing that you need in your life and a creative practice?
Yeah.
And I think my starting point, my starting assumption is that cooking is a creative practice. But the more I talk to people, the more I realize that sometimes that is not the most helpful way to think about it. That sometimes the cooking, I think I was thinking, first you get inspired, then you cook. And in fact, for some people, I had this great conversation with Jenna Hamshaw. She's written a bunch of some vegan meal prep books and some other books. She has a new one called A Green a Bean. And she's just like really busy. She works in a hospital. Life is so busy. She has so little time. And she said to me, I think if you think of it as, okay, I have to get inspired before I cook. She's like, I never cook.
Yeah.
I'm not there. There's too much in the life. And so she says, you don't have to feel, yes, ideally, you do this reset and the kitchen becomes this beautiful part of your day. And she said, sometimes you don't get there until you're pretty far into it.
Yeah,
Sometimes
absolutely.
you just cook.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just cook. And she said for her, the structure she has built to she does a lot of prep on the weekends and sort of plans like 3 days of things that are in her fridge. And then Thursday, she pulls something from the freezer. And so she has this routine that exists and doesn't require creativity on a Monday night, on a Tuesday night. She's not starting there. And then she said, sometimes cooking is just something you have to do to feed yourself. And it's okay to not feel inspired. You don't want to beat yourself up for not feeling inspired. You are feeding yourself and you feel good. She's like, I got to clean my house too. I don't have to be inspired to clean my house. You just sometimes have to do it. And that was like so different from my thinking about putting your oxygen mask on first, right?
Yeah.
But she was like, the cooking and the food sustains me.
Yeah.
The structure can be actually a relief when life is overwhelming. And that just was so different from my sort of like, wait until you have a craving. And then, so, I think it's different for everyone. And it can be that when you go into the kitchen, even without an idea, you might begin the practice of the chopping the garlic or the chopping the onions and find it got you there. You feel better than when you came in.
I mean, I'm going to bring up sex, but that's what sex therapists teach right now. It's like, you're not always going to want to go there, but sometimes you have to go there and then the desire will arise. And I sometimes think about that for cooking because absolutely, it's not always going to be this nirvana state in the kitchen, but it can be a way to tune in to where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the secret sauce is to allow yourself to be where you're at. You don't need to change it. You don't need to push yourself out of it. You don't need to shame yourself out of it. You can be tired and you can cook dinner. And sometimes the cooking dinner will actually help to nourish something deeper within you.
Exactly.
So it's kind of, it's all there. It's all there. But I want to get back to this idea of creativity because I love this concept of having a structure. I think a lot of us who feed family, we cook most meals. We maybe do takeout once a week because we live in the boondocks and we don't have great access to takeout, but there's a lot of meals to plan. And so I have to have a plan. I have to have a loose plan for my weeknight meals. And because I just need it, I just need to walk into the kitchen Monday night, 5:30, 6 o'clock from picking up the kids and being like, okay, this is what I'm making. It's already set. I already have this idea. I can just dive into it. What are some of the structures that you have in your life that allow for a bit more ease?
I think a few things. I think there's so much noise. There's so much food out there that it can become this like, oh, what I'm going to cook. I'm going to look at all these millions of different things. I have these bookshelves full of cookbooks and there's this person on Instagram and it's constantly
So much.
looping and whatever, TikTok. And I think it can be helpful to claim a quiet moment. And like, as my child gets older, more and more of these miraculously appear. But, maybe it's a Sunday night, maybe it's while another parent deals with bedtime, whatever it is. And for me, it's to read an old cookbook or to look at recipes I've saved. And for me, I find that a week is too much planning. There's like a sweet spot around like 2-3 days. So I think that many days at a time, and ideally a cycle where like, maybe you had a dinner party and there's sort of like a built-in meal prep element to a dinner party because you have leftovers. So how are you going to eat it as leftovers on day 1 and then you're going to transform it into something on day 2? And that is like, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, like check. And, sometimes, so I have a whiteboard. I'll write it down. I have Apple Notes. I'll write those down. I like to think that many days in advance. Sometimes, I'll wake up on Wednesday morning and be craving something and then think about what that can be. I actually post what I'm actually cooking on Substack that day. I think today I posted the 101st dinner plan, and they're not sexy. They're not fancy. It's just like what I'm actually making, even when I'm struggling, and actually, especially when I'm struggling, because I think I love to talk about recipes, and maybe you're making those recipes, in their full thing for a weekend, but maybe on a weeknight you're just making that sauce, or you're just inspired by it, or whatever. I also think a lot when I'm trying to come up with ideas, I think a lot about flavors I'm nostalgic for. And, maybe it's a memory, and maybe you don't make exactly that thing, but it can kind of, make you smile to think about, like, what was something you loved as a kid? Like, what version of that would you love now? And maybe that's a seasonal thing. Like, oh yeah, we used to make applesauce in the fall. Like, okay, that feels good. But yeah, for me, the system is really like, try to quiet all the things that are telling you there's a million ideas. Try to save things when they're appealing at the time. Like, if I see on a Substack that somebody made something that looked good to me, save. I have a private Pinterest that I do that. I, make lists of recipes, save it in a note. And then the other note that I keep, which is, I don't know if you know Megan Splon and Stacey Billis had a podcast called Didn't I Just Feed You? And they would talk about making like a greatest hits list, the recipes that your family loves. And you can go back, if you keep your notes that like, if you keep a date on it, that's ideal. Then you can go back and be like, oh yeah, last September we were making those noodles all the time and they were so good. So like going back into the ones that you loved can get you started. You can copy a meal plan from before.
I love this because part of this structure that you're building is also how you stoke your own creativity. But what I really love about it is like, I can hear the joy in the process. So the fact that you said, I'm going to claim a quiet moment. I'm going to take this moment for myself. So often we think of like, I've got to plan the week's menus for the kids and what is it? And it feels like this thing we have to do. But if you can put a different perspective on that and going back to what we were talking about earlier, and it's like, what do I want? What were the dishes of my childhood that I could remake this week? Or, wow, it is fall. I am so craving some kind of cozy braise. Like, what can I bring into it? And all of a sudden, this process can start to be really fun instead of overwhelming, or maybe something that we feel forced to do or we have to do. And then I love your idea about keeping track. I interviewed Jenny Rosenstock, who's like the most wonderful tracker of her dinner party meals. But I, for years and years and years, kept track of our Sunday night meals. We always do a big Sunday night supper. It's just like a lovely ritual at home with my two kids. And 2 years ago, I think I started again. I stopped writing them down and then I just started doing that. And it's just a Word doc on my computer. And it's so fun to go back through. And they're like, it's not a fancy list. This is for nobody's eyes but my own. But it's to go back through. I do share it on Substack, but go back through and see what we made. And that inspires me more. And then it reminds me of what dishes, the memories that my own family that we're creating in the moment. We're creating traditions as we go. So I think those are some really great tips.
I don't do it perfectly, and I think that's okay. Like, I think you also have to like tune into, I just can't plan this week. That's just what it's going to be. And as long as you're well provisioned enough that you can probably improvise. Like, I know, like I can't really order delivery when I'm also doing a school pickup and also do whatever. Like, I'm going to cook, and I know that among the things I have in my fridge, it's going to turn into some meals. I have tortillas. I have guacamole. I have a can of beans. I have a block of tofu. I have the leftovers from the weekend. Like, I don't know which day is going to be what, but I can picture 3 days, and that's enough. And if I was writing it down for the whole week and like, I think there's a pressure, especially if you're in the food world and you're making like content out of it. You're like, here's my whole week's meal plan. You have to do that. But, if I do that, I'm so far from the reality of my fridge at
Yeah.
that moment.
Yeah.
Like what if you went
Yeah.
to the farmer's market and there were beautiful
Yep.
peppers? Or what if you went out last minute or had people over last minute? And, you just sometimes, I think we are so hard on ourselves in
Yes.
this sort of oversharing universe. So I try not to be.
Well, I want to direct people to my recent episode with Georgia Friedman, all about snacking dinners, because what you just talked about, having provisions on hand, she offers really great tips for just having stuff on hand to do a snack dinner or a grazing dinner or do dinner in 20 minutes with rice and beans and things that you can just pull from the pantry. And then I also want to touch upon, you kind of just brought us there so beautifully, this idea of perfectionism, because perfectionism rears its head everywhere in our lives, but the kitchen is certainly a place. And there's so much pressure that we get as, we are content creators and we are putting beautiful work out there because that's our job. But I even have to shut myself off from it and be like, this is not real. This is not realistic. This is not what life actually looks like. I don't need it to look like that. I want my life to look like my life. And that means it's going to be messy. There's going to be nights when I just drop the whole pot of stew on the floor. Like stuff happens. And so how do we give ourselves grace? How do you get out of this idea of perfectionism?
Georgia's so smart too. We were talking about this and she said, I think we also layer in this thing about how dinner is also, in addition to like everyone's nutrition being provided in this meal, it's also the moment where you're going to do like all your parenting for the day and you're going to like be nurturing your relationship. And, it's like all the things. And it's like, wow, that's a lot to put on like a half an hour. And truly, dinner doesn't have to do that much. And I don't know. I mean, when my husband travels, I wanted to create a ritual that felt fun with my kid who's sort of bummed that he's gone. And, we make waffles every Friday when he's gone. And is it a super healthy meal? I mean, she puts peanut butter on it. It's fine.
It sounds amazing.
I'm not concerned. She is fine. No. She is growing. She's eating things. And, is it exactly the family meal that I pictured? No, like she doesn't eat everything we eat. And like, that's fine too. And our table is not a place where we fight. And it's not a place where we bargain. And it's not a place where we bribe. Yes. And that is really important to me. And I think, you just can't have it all, right? So, I think letting go of that a little bit. I mean, we often in our house, I'll be like, oh, what do you want for lunch? Like I was just going to make a bean thing and just like dump, strain a can of beans and like put whatever in it, right? And it's like, maybe it's Calabrian chilies and a shallot and whatever random greens are around. It's not a dinner, right? Yeah. It's not a capital D dinner. I would do that for lunch. Why don't I do that for dinner?
Yeah.
What is it about? We've like built up this thing from whatever all the pressures are. When like really, if you sit around and eat toast with another person, the most important thing is not the toast.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Just tonight, we've gotten into this wonderful routine of reviving a tuna melt for dinner. And it's been months now. And this started last year at some point. And my mom we make them differently every time. Like if I'm really feeling extra, I'll cook them buttered in a skillet, like diner style, like my mom makes, which is so good. Sometimes it's like open faced on English muffins in the toaster oven. It's always different, but it's tuna salad. And tonight I was just telling my husband, like I was just conversing with him. I haven't been to the market yet this week. I'm going tomorrow. And I was like, what's tonight? He's like, oh, it's tuna salad night. And I'm like, yes, it's tuna salad night. Like it's the easiest meal. It takes maybe 5 minutes for us to like actually prep. And yeah, it's like the kids love it. And so I think I'm saying this because sometimes these simple things, repeat them. Like there's no shame. And the waffle night every Friday night, how fun is that? And how simple that can be. But it's not necessarily about the food. Right. It's about that time with your daughter.
Yeah. And, I make this show with cookbook authors, and they're often talking about the easiest recipe in their book, the weeknight recipe. And that's the one that we're reprinting in the newsletter. But sometimes there'll be something inspiring in a more complicated recipe. And I'm not saying like, oh, I cook like that every night. I don't. But there might be something in there that gets me excited.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sort of what I need, that like a little spark, maybe it's buying, a new seasoning or, a new jar of pickled peppers. I saw a tuna mill that had like a lot of like pepperoncini or something in it. And that sounded so good. And, it's like whatever it takes for you to feel a little spark, I think can be the starting point.
Exactly. And that's the last question I have for you. And that's about creativity. And it sounds like we've already covered this a lot. You've got your cookbooks. You love to look through your books and get inspired. Is there anything that you do that doesn't, this is a question I've never asked before. So I don't know where it's coming from, but is there anything you do to spark your creativity that has nothing to do with cooking?
I mean, for me, a walk is always the answer. I do think that like physically changing where you are, fresh air is like really, really important. And I do love to read. And I love, I need to get out of my own head. So like really for me, if what I want to be inspired in is food, I need to eat other people's food. I need to go to a restaurant. Takeout doesn't do it. I need to go to a restaurant, or I need to go to a friend's house. That can be so inspiring. I was just talking to Rosie Kellett, who has a new book called In for Dinner, and she lives in a communal living situation. And the deal is that they each only cook one night a week. And it's so exciting that it's their night. If it's your night and you're only having to think of dinner once a week, then you're like giving yourself the space to see what comes up in your mind over the course of a week, right? And if you are the person who's responsible for cooking dinner 5, 6, 7 nights a week, you don't have that luxury, except if you just like don't make yourself think of new things, right? Like that's really part of it. And then I think the cooking itself is this sort of separate, like, setting yourself up to feel good in the kitchen. Like some people need it to be quiet, like truly, like don't talk to me. And some people I'm listening to a history podcast, which is like totally not about food. And it's so interesting and entertaining. And for me, it's like, okay, this is my like time to think about something totally different. And Melissa Clark came on the show and said when she's cooking, her husband reads to her. Oh, which is wonderful, but not for me. Like, definitely not.
Oh, Maggie, this conversation has lit me up. And I think it's given my listeners so much. I feel like the word that just came into my head is some grace. Like, yeah, it's dinner. Like, let's cook dinner. Yeah, let's make it fun when we can. Sometimes we just have to get through it. And also, like, can we make it for us too? Can it not just be this thing we have to do, but can we like do it for us? And it can be, sometimes it's just toast. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's enough.
And there's so many things now. I mean, I really do think we are so lucky that right now there's all these great small companies who are like selling shortcuts that really are great. Like Brooklyn Deli makes these wonderful curry bases. And I got this char siu sauce that's like, like Chinese barbecue sauce from Bowl Cut that's really good. And like, it's like, okay, what do you have? Tofu. You have rotisserie chicken. You have whatever vegetables you can throw in the oven. Anything is good with that sauce. Like, just like give yourself permission to make your life easier.
Ooh, yes, please. All right, my final question is a fun one. If it was your last meal on earth in this very moment, right now, what would you choose?
I love Dungeness crab, which is a West Coast crab that's really big and really sweet. We used to go crabbing when I was a kid, and you'd like put them in these pots and like drive the boat around and then come back and pick them up and they'd bite you. And so I think Dungeness crab, good loaf of bread, salad with avocado, can't beat it. White Burgundy, champagne, something great.
I think I need to do like some sort of event where I get to eat everybody's last meal with them, because every single person who's ever said, they're just always exactly what I want to. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If this work resonates with you in any way, you can support it by leaving a review or comment or sharing it with friends. Also, you can sign up for the newsletter, Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. And by becoming a paid member for just $5 a month, you help fund this entire project. Thank you so much to all of you who are already subscribed, especially to those paid subscribers. This work could not happen without you. I'm Nikki Sizemore, and as always, remember to nourish yourself with intention and love.